It's 11:47
I can't
on a
believe
Tuesday
this.
night, and you're looking at your retirement account again. Not because
Maybe the
anything
answer is
happened,
out there.
not because the market crashed. Just to check the number, you
You seem
refresh
down.
the page.
Coffee?
Then you do the
I'm
same
fine.
math you've
Just
done many
work.
times before.
Come on,
You look at
my
your
treat.
balance.
All
you
right,
think about how
you
many
win.
years you have
Great,
left to work.
let's go.
Then you compare it to some retirement number you once heard
What
you
a
should
beautiful
reach. The
sunset.
numbers don't match. They never seem to match.
I wonder what's
So you
beyond those
close the tab.
hills.
You tell yourself
This
you'll
journey
think about
feels
it
just
another
right.
day. Then you go to bed. And that's the strange part. Nothing is actually wrong. Your credit is fine. You have some savings. You put money into your 401 every paycheck. You did what responsible people are supposed
This
to do.
bridge looks really
There
shaky.
is no emergency. Yet there is still that
I have
quiet
to keep
question in the back
going.
of your mind. Am I going to be
Whoa,
okay?
it's swaying!
It follows you through every paycheck,
Wow,
every bill,
so
and every
much
year
money.
that passes. Now think about
Let
someone
me
you
see
know.
one.
Maybe you started working around
It's
the same
so
time.
shiny.
Maybe you earn about the same amount of money. But they don't seem worried in the same way. They aren't checking their balance at midnight. They aren't carrying that weight. And it isn't because they're richer than you. They didn't win the lottery. They didn't inherit millions. They just learned a different kind of math. A kind of retirement math that used to be common. A kind of math that slowly disappeared, especially after 2008. Today, I'm going to give that math back to you. Before we begin, I want to be clear about what this video is and what it isn't. This is not a video about saving more money. You're already saving. This is not about giving up coffee, canceling subscriptions, or finding another thing to blame yourself for. The problem was never your discipline. The real problem is that the rules of retirement changed while you were living your life, and nobody stopped to explain the new rules. There was once a simple system that ordinary people could understand and trust. Then, little by little, that system changed. By 2008, the last piece of it broke in a way everyone could see. So in this video, we're going to look at the old retirement math your parents and grandparents used. Then we'll look at what replaced it, why it feels so much harder today, and what people who feel financially secure understand that most people never get taught. Because it isn't a secret, it isn't a trick, it's just a kind of math that nobody took the time to show you. Let's get it back. Section 1. Picture Maya's grandfather for a moment. He worked for the same company for 31 years. Every morning he got up, went to work, did his job, and came home. He wasn't studying stock charts. He wasn't listening to finance podcasts. He didn't spend his weekends reading investment books. In fact, he never checked a retirement account balance at midnight. There was no balance to check. His retirement math was simple. Show up, do the work, put in your years. Then when you retire, a check arrives every month for the rest of your life. That was it. No guessing, no calculators, no wondering if the market would be up or down next year. The company took care of that part. The company carried the risk. The company hired experts whose job was to worry about investments and market crashes. His job was simply to keep showing up. Today, that sounds almost strange. But for millions of workers, it was completely normal. This wasn't some rare benefit that only executives received. It wasn't a special reward for the wealthy. It was part of how retirement worked. In 1980, about 38% of private sector workers in America had a traditional pension. That meant they were promised a monthly income for life after retirement. Think about what that really means. If you asked someone whether they would have money when they stopped working, they didn't have to estimate. They didn't have to guess how much the stock market might grow. They didn't have to wonder whether they were saving enough. The answer was already built into the system. Retirement was not a puzzle they had to solve by themselves. The system solved most of it for them. And the most important word in that system was one simple word: guaranteed. Your paycheck in retirement was guaranteed. Your income was guaranteed. The responsibility was guaranteed to belong to someone else. That single word removed a huge amount of fear from people's lives. But over the next few decades, that word slowly started to disappear. Not all at once, not with one big announcement. It simply faded away, year after year, until one day most workers were carrying a burden that earlier generations never had to carry. And almost nobody stopped to notice when the word guaranteed left the room. Section 2. This is the part of the story that most people never heard. The system changed, but it changed so slowly that almost nobody noticed it happening. At first, the 401(k) was not meant to replace a pension. It was supposed to be extra. Think of it as a bonus account, a helpful tool that let workers save more money and get tax benefits along the way. The idea was simple. You would still have your pension. You would still get that guaranteed monthly check in retirement. The 401(k) would just give you a little more on top. But something unexpected happened. Companies started looking at the numbers. They realized that pensions were expensive. They also realized that pensions came with a lot of responsibility. If the market fell, the company had to deal with it. If people lived longer than expected, the company had to deal with that too. The company carried the risk. Then they discovered a different option. Instead of promising a monthly check for life, they could offer a 401(n) account and let workers build their own retirement savings. Little by little, many companies made the switch. Over the next few decades, traditional pensions became less common. Between 1980 and 2008, the share of private sector workers covered by a pension was cut by about half. Today, only a small group of workers still have access to one. And with that change, something important moved. The risk moved. The risk of market crashes. The risk of running out of money. The risk of not saving enough. The risk of living longer than expected. All of it slowly moved from the company to the worker. It moved from the company's balance sheet to your kitchen table. For years, this shift was easy to ignore because markets were mostly rising. Then came 2008. Suddenly, millions of people opened their retirement accounts and saw something terrifying. Balances that had taken years to build had fallen by a third or more. Many of those people had done everything they were told to do. They worked hard. They saved regularly. They followed the rules, and yet their retirement savings dropped right when they needed them most. A pension would have kept sending the same monthly check. A 401(a) could not make that promise. It did not care how close you were to retirement. It did not care how worried you felt. That is the difference. That is the handoff. Once you see it, it becomes impossible to miss. The company is no longer the pension manager. You are. And nobody ever asked whether you wanted that job. Section 3 now, let's look at the new math. This is the part most people never get taught. Under the old system, retirement was mostly about income. You worked for many years, and then a monthly check arrived. The question was simple. How much income will I receive? Today, the question is very different. Now you are expected to build a large pile of money and turn that pile into your own monthly income. In other words, you have to create the retirement check yourself. So how big does that pile need to be? A common guideline used by many financial planners is called the 4% rule. The basic idea is simple. If you retire, you may be able to withdraw about 4% of your savings in the first year, and then slowly increase that amount over time to keep up with rising prices. But here's what most people never stop to calculate. If you want $58,000 a year in retirement income, you do not need $58,000 saved. You need about 25 times that amount. That's roughly $1.46 million. Read that number again. Not 50,000, not 100,000, about $1,460,000. That is the real target hidden behind the income goal. And suddenly, the stress starts to make sense. Because nobody sits you down and says, your job is to build a pile worth nearly $1.5 million, while paying for housing, food, healthcare, family expenses, and everything else life throws at you. But that is the assignment. And it doesn't end there. After building the pile, you must also manage it. You have to decide how much to withdraw. You have to worry about market drops. You have to think about inflation. You have to make sure the money lasts for 20, 30, or even 40 years. And you have to do all of this without knowing exactly how long you will live. That is a very different problem from the one your grandfather faced. He did not need to build a mountain of money. He did not need to manage withdrawals. He did not need to worry about whether his savings would last until age 90. The system handled those questions for him. Today, those questions belong to you. That is the math they stopped teaching. And once you understand it, you begin to see why so many hardworking people feel worried even when they are doing everything right. The goal moved. Nobody told them. And they have been trying to solve the wrong equation ever since. Section 4. And here is the hardest part of all. The goal does not stay still. Imagine climbing a mountain where the peak keeps moving higher while you are still trying to reach it. That is what retirement feels like for many people today. Not long ago, many Americans said they believed they needed about $26 million to retire comfortably. Then the estimate rose to about $1.46 million. That is a jump of $200,000 in just 1 year. Think about that for a moment. Most people do not save $200,000 in a decade, yet the target moved by that much in a single year. And it was not because they made bad choices. It was not because they stopped saving. It was not because they were irresponsible. The target moved for reasons that were mostly outside their control. Prices went up. People started living longer. The cost of healthcare continued to rise. The ground underneath the retirement system shifted again. Now compare that moving target to where many people actually are. For Americans between the ages of 35 and 44, the middle 401(n) balance is around $40,000. Not the people at the bottom, not the people who never saved, the person right in the middle. And many households do not have dedicated retirement savings at all. When you put those numbers side by side, the gap looks enormous. That is why so many people feel stuck. They save, they work, they make progress. Yet the finish line seems to move farther away. And when that happens, it is easy to blame yourself. The internet is full of people who will tell you that if you are worried about retirement, it must be because you are lazy or careless. But that explanation misses the real story. The problem is not that people stopped trying. The problem is that the assignment changed. A system that once offered a guarantee became a system that asks each person to build and manage their own retirement plan. The mountain became much larger. Then the mountain kept growing, and many people were given only a small shovel and told to move faster. So if you sometimes feel like you are running as hard as you can and still not getting ahead, that feeling is not coming from nowhere. It is the result of a system that shifted more responsibility onto individuals and then acted surprised when the climb became difficult. That is why the balance gets refreshed at midnight, not because you are failing, because the target never stops moving. Section 5 at this point, you might be thinking, okay, but there is still Social Security. That is my safety net. And for many people, that is true. Social Security remains one of the most important sources of retirement income in America. But let's take an honest look at it. According to the Social Security trustees, the main retirement trust fund is expected to face a funding shortfall around 2033 if no major changes are made. That does not mean Social Security disappears. It does not mean the checks suddenly stop. In fact, people who claim the program will completely vanish are usually overstating the problem. The system is expected to keep collecting payroll taxes and paying benefits. The concern is that, if lawmakers make no changes, the program may only be able to pay about 77% of scheduled benefits. That means a reduction of roughly 23%, not just for future retirees, for people who are already retired as well. Now, nobody knows exactly what Congress will do between now and then. Changes could be made, benefits could be adjusted, taxes could be increased, a combination of solutions could happen. The future is still being debated, but that uncertainty is the important point. Years ago, people could look at Social Security and see a firm number, a dependable foundation, a piece of retirement income they felt comfortable counting on. Today, that foundation comes with more questions than it once did. The floor is still there. But there is now a small asterisk beside it, and that matters because retirement planning is already difficult enough. Every time another question mark appears, it becomes one more thing for people to worry about. One more number to estimate, one more risk to think through, one more responsibility added to the pile. And when you put everything together, you begin to see the full picture. A retirement target that keeps growing, a savings challenge that falls mostly on your shoulders, and a safety net that comes with some uncertainty about its future. If you have ever found yourself lying awake at night, quietly wondering whether you will be okay, that feeling did not come from nowhere. Your brain was doing the math, not perfectly, not consciously, but accurately enough to sense that the rules had changed. You were not overreacting. You were responding to a system that became more complicated, more uncertain, and more dependent on you than it used to be. That quiet hum in the background of your life was not drama. It was arithmetic. Section 6. Now let's go back to that person we talked about earlier. The one who is about your age. The one who earns about what you earn. The one who somehow does not seem to carry the same weight around every day. What did they figure out? Most people assume the answer must be something dramatic. Maybe they picked the perfect stock. Maybe they got lucky. Maybe they received a large inheritance. But most of the time, it is much simpler than that. They stopped using the old rules in a system that no longer follows them. That is the trap many people fall into without even realizing it. We are still carrying the emotional habits of the pension era. We tell ourselves to be responsible. We contribute to our accounts. We trust that everything will somehow work out in the end, and those are good habits, but they are not a complete plan. The old system trained people to believe that someone else was handling the hard math. The company handled it. The pension managers handled it. The system handled it. So many of us never learn to calculate the numbers for ourselves. Instead, we avoid them. We glance at our account balance. We feel worried. Then we close the page and hope the feeling goes away. A few weeks later, we check again. The cycle repeats. We call it staying informed, but often it is just another way of touching the same fear. The people who seem calmer usually do something different. They stop running from the number. They face it directly. They figure out what they actually need for their own life, not someone else's goal, not a number from a headline, their number. Then they build a plan around that target. Every dollar they save has a purpose. Every step moves towards something clear. They are no longer saving into a fog and hoping it works out. They know what they are aiming for. And there is one more thing they understand. They separate retirement from freedom. For a long time, those two ideas were treated as the same thing. You worked until a certain age. Then you became free. That was the deal. But the new system allows a different way of thinking. Freedom does not have to begin on one specific birthday. Freedom can start the moment your finances give you more choices, more control, more flexibility, more room to breathe. That shift changes everything. Because once freedom becomes the goal instead of a date on a calendar, the math starts to feel less like a prison sentence and more like a roadmap. And that is what the calmer person figured out. Not a secret, not a shortcut, just a different way of reading the numbers. Section 7 now, let's make this practical. Before we go any further, I want to be clear about something. I am not your financial advisor. I am not telling you what investments to buy or what choices to make with your money. What I am showing you is the way many financially secure people think about the problem. The first step is surprisingly simple. They replace a fog with a number. Most people have a general idea that they should save for retirement. But save for retirement is not a target. It is a direction. The people who feel calmer usually know the actual number they are working toward. They have taken the time to estimate what their life might cost and what level of income they want in the future. Then they work backward from there. The moment that number exists on paper, something important happens. The fear becomes smaller, not because the number is easy, but because it is clear. A target may be difficult to reach, but at least you know where it is. A fog gives you nothing to aim at, and half of the stress comes from not knowing. The second step is building a system that points directly at that number, not a random habit, not a promise to save when things get better. A real system with a clear purpose. Every dollar has a job. Every step moves in the same direction. And many people try to avoid relying on only one source of income. The lesson of the last several decades is that anything you do not control can change. Pensions changed, jobs change, companies change. So they look for ways to create more than one stream of income, even if those streams start very small. The goal is not to become rich overnight. The goal is to become more stable. Think about a family like the Garcias. 2 incomes, children, a mortgage, car payments. At the end of most months, there is not much money left over. From the outside, nothing changes overnight. Their bills are still there. Their responsibilities are still there. But the day they calculate their real number and build a system around it, something shifts. The feeling changes before the balance does. The constant worry begins to fade, not because they suddenly became wealthy, because they stopped wandering in the dark. They turned a vague fear into a clear math problem, and a math problem can be worked on, improved, and solved. A vague fear cannot. That is the real power of the new math. Section 8 now, let's go back to where we started. It's 11:47 on a Tuesday night. You are looking at your retirement account again. The balance is sitting there on the screen. You refresh the page. You do the mental math. You compare where you are with where you think you should be. And somehow, the numbers never seem to fit together. But now think about that other person again. The one with a similar income. The one who does not seem to carry the same weight around every day. The reason they are not refreshing their balance tonight is not because they have a bigger number. It is because they replaced refreshing with arithmetic. They know their target. They know what they are working toward. They know how their plan is supposed to get them there. The uncertainty that creates anxiety has been replaced by clarity. That does not mean every problem is solved. It does not mean the market cannot fall. It does not mean life cannot surprise them. It simply means they know where they are going. And that changes everything. Because the real freedom was never about becoming rich. Many people with large account balances still worry every day. They still check their numbers over and over again. They still feel uncertain. A large balance without a clear plan is still confusion. It is still a fog. Real freedom is something different. It is knowing exactly what mountain you are climbing. It is knowing why you are climbing it. It is knowing the path you are taking. And it is knowing what success actually looks like for your life. That is what brings peace. The retirement math that disappeared after 2008 was never too difficult for ordinary people to understand. The problem was that the system changed. The old system handled much of the math for you. When it stepped away, it never handed you the instruction book. So millions of people were left trying to solve a problem they had never been taught to solve. But the good news is that the math can still be learned. It is not a secret. It is not reserved for experts. It is a skill. And like any skill, it gets easier once you start. The night you finally calculate your real number and build a real plan around it is often the night something important changes. Not your balance, not your income, your mindset. The constant hum begins to fade because you are no longer guessing. You are no longer lost. You did what you were told to do. You worked hard. You saved. Now do the one thing nobody taught you. Do the math. It belongs to you now.